you did for work, or they could be inherited. So you have hearing loss that runs in families, and that could be inherited. So, but hearing is a big thing. I mean, if you can't hear your friends, if you can't hear your family, your loved ones, studies have shown that people with hearing loss tend to isolate themselves, and that often leads to frustration. And it really changes. It has to do with quality of life when you can hear well. So, the way hearing works is that, sound comes into our ears, goes inside. There's an organ that actually sits about 1.5 inches inside the head called the cochlea. And that's where all the work takes place when sound comes in. And the cochlea takes those sound waves, it converts them into electrical signals. It goes to our auditory processing centers, creates hearing. So, if you have hearing loss, let's say you worked in a production environment or you worked in construction where there was a lot of noise, that can damage the 100,000 little hair fibers in your ear, and they can break off. And those hair fibers are tuned to specific frequencies. And when they break off, we lose the ability to hear or translate those frequencies. The other thing that can happen is that we can, part of hearing is being able to hear the sound. The other part of hearing is being able to make sense of it intellectually, to be able to understand what words mean. And so when you start losing some of those frequencies, you lose your ability to understand the sound and what it means. And so you lose your ability to communicate. So if I say a word you like, stove, S-T-O-V-E, and you had high frequency hearing loss, all those consonant sounds are high frequency sounds. So you might hear, instead of hearing stove, you might hear toe or so. You're going to hear that big O sound in the middle, but not the whole word. And that's why people with hearing loss will withdraw from communication, because they don't want to say the word or answer the wrong question because they may not hear the word correctly to begin with.
Well, how do those little hairs break off? Is it the sound that breaks them? Is the vibration of the airwave breaks those little things off? Is that?
Well, those little hairs are in that organ. That's an oil-filled organ. And so inside there, as the sound hits that organ, it vibrates.
Is that the eardrum?
Well, as the sound hits the eardrum.
Or the cochlea.
And, the sound hits the eardrum in the middle ear, and then there are those 3 tiny bones. Those bones actually amplify the sound and transmit it to the cochlea, and it sets up waves of motion in that oil. Those hairs are in that oil. And so if you get some really loud sound, it can absolutely break them off.
So the movement of the oil is so because it's been by those 3 little bones, that the movement of the oil is so rapid that it breaks off the little hairs.
It could break them off, absolutely. And it turns out that the ones that have to do with high frequency are at the very beginning of that process. And so they take the greatest impact. Now, the other problem is a genetic problem. There's a hearing loss called presbycusis hearing loss. Think of as age-related hearing loss. It tends to run in families. And in that kind of hearing loss, those hairs can become diseased. They can grow old. They can fall off or shrivel. The result is the same. They lose their ability to correctly react to the sound waves that they're sensing. And therefore, the signals that go up to the brain are less, and the whole hearing diminishes.
Well, now your customers at Beltone are mostly people past 60. Is that?
Yes. By and large, most of the people we see are in their 65 to 70 when we first see them. We don't even see people until they've suspected they have hearing loss, on the average, about 5 years. It takes that long to kind of come to terms with, or your family is saying something to you like, you've got to go get this checked out. So typically 65 to 70, of course. I've been in the hearing business many years, and now our age group was in their 70s. Now it's in their 80s and 90s. We have about a dozen patients that are over 100.
Well, say more about your business, Perry.
Well, I think the most interesting thing about the hearing business, it's a wonderful business to be in. We're in the medical retail side of that business. We have audiology consultants. We have licensed hearing aid dispensers that go in and do full auditory examinations, and a good full hearing test will take about an hour to do. And it includes not only just being able to recognize the tones, but it also includes a test that have to do with intelligibility. How well are you understanding the songs? How are you interpreting the songs? And that helps us appreciate where the problem lies. Sometimes the problem is such that we can immediately recommend hearing aids and correct it. Sometimes the problem is such that we'll have to refer out to an ear, nose, and throat doctor for further examination, for further follow-up. And that's why a good hearing test is so important. Over the years, we found people that had tumors. They didn't even know they had a tumor, but we were able to detect it in the hearing and get them to a medical professional who could help them with that.
Now, there's a prospect, Perry, of the liberalization of your market, which is a controlled market. You have government licensing. Is that right?
Yes.
Is it government
audiology and hearing aid dispensers? Okay,
so those are sort of government-owned fields. How is that field possibly changing with legislation in Washington?
Well, there's legislation that, matter of fact, it was just passed last week in the House. It was called H.R. 2430, which is the FDA reauthorization bill. And buried in that bill was a provision to establish a group of hearing aids for over-the-counter dispensing. And essentially the idea is a good one. In fact, Marshall Blackburn in Tennessee was the main sponsor of the bill. And the idea is to make hearing aids more affordable for everybody. I think it's the wrong way to approach it, but the context of it is there would be a group of hearing aids that are very simple. A patient would go in, take a self-examination, and via that self-examination would come out with some kind of recommendation for the bracket of hearing aid you need, and then you would buy that bracket of hearing aid for probably several $100s, and then you would go put it on and wear it. So we're all for making hearing aids more affordable. The problem with that bill is it requires, first of all, self-diagnosis. We know that the hearing impaired have a very difficult timing of self-diagnosis. Most of them are in denial, and it's their family that's saying something to them. Secondly, I was talking to you about diseases that we find in a regular examination. Those diseases would never be found. If somebody has a hearing loss, and the hearing loss has to do with a tumor and not the mechanics of the ear, they would never know that. And so it would go undiagnosed for much longer. The other challenge with that is that you could diagnose yourself as having severe hearing loss when you don't have severe hearing loss, and get a hearing aid that would actually affect your hearing, would hurt your hearing. And so
because it's too loud.
Because it's way too loud. And so there are all these problems with it. Again, I think a better solution, although I'm not one for big government programs, is it's astounding to me that over the years, there have been many introductions of bills to get Medicare and Medicaid to support or help with the cost of hearing aids, and it never gets out of committee. And yet, there are other kinds of things that are covered that for somebody over, I would mention one, but I won't. There's somebody over 65 would never use, and yet somehow they're covered. So I just think this is the wrong approach.
Well, why do hearing aids cost? My listener has his old dad who's at the nursing home, and he's had good hearing, but now he's getting a little feeble, and he's at a life care center of Hickson. Well, he's a long-term patient at Life Care Hickson, and he's got a hearing aid, and he's got one that, well, let's see here. Why does the hearing aid that man needs cost $2,000 a pop? Why is a hearing aid not $50 a pop?
Well, there are hearing aids or hearing devices out there that are $50 a pop. The question is, hearing aids these days are very sophisticated. 20 years ago, hearing aids were primarily amplifiers. They just amplified the sound. And I, having dealt with a number of people over the years, said, well, now what happens is people hear poorly, really loud. Hearing aids today are computer controlled. They're processing the sound. They're dealing with the outside noise and the outside distractions that can prevent somebody from hearing well. So hearing aids, like any medical device, have a cost associated with them, as well as just having to go through the FDA programs and all the authorizations. In the United States, an average hearing aid costs about $2,500. So it would be $5,000
for a single
hearing aid. So $5,000. Now there are roughly 200 hearing aid companies in the world, but there are really only about 6 to 10 major manufacturers of hearing aids. From any of those manufacturers, you would get a great hearing aid if it's dispensed well. All of them, the price range is about the same. It's still going to be in that, $4,000 to $5,000. Go to a pair of hearing aids that's actually going to do the job.
Well, is there some way that Beltone, of which you're the president and CEO here in the Chattanooga area, East Tennessee and North Georgia with 14 outlets. Is there not some way that your industry could come up with a $999 per hearing aid cost that would require some radical change in the way your business is done,
well,
where the price is more reachable?
Yeah, we have those hearing aids. I mean, we have hearing aids that are $900 to $5,000 per hearing aid. The question is, what do you need it to do? And we're always trying to balance affordability with the hearing loss. We're trying to give the person as much as we can for their ability to afford that function. And so we have hearing aids at that. Again, there are hearing aids that are much less expensive that you see around, but people are being taken advantage of there. They're getting hearing aids that are World War II amplifiers. All they do is amplify. They really do nothing else. And they're a terrible product. And what happens is that for a hearing aid wearer, if they put those hearing aids like bifocals are work, it takes time to adapt to those things in your ear and for them to do the job they're supposed to do. If you have a terrible experience with that first hearing aid, the likelihood of you getting the help you need is very slim. So, we're focused on patient care, as any good medical practice would say, making sure that we recommend the best product that's going to do the job. Beltone, to its great credit, doesn't sell any hearing aids that are bad quality or don't do what they're supposed to do. And so think about the market in general. People who need hearing help. The other problem with hearing aids is John Hopkins did a study about 5 years ago that linked hearing loss with early onset dementia. It doesn't say that everybody that has hearing loss is going to have dementia. It does say that these two things appear to be linked. And that's because if you're not getting all that sound in your ear, those auditory processes are not being used. If you take somebody that's had a severe hearing loss for a number of years without being an aid, they don't hear those sounds. Pretty soon you hear it in their voice. They don't say those sounds anymore because they don't hear them. And so we can tell if a person's gone a long time, oftentimes by just listening to the way they say their words. But that's called auditory deprivation. And so you can certainly, through therapy, get some of that regained. And hearing aids help stop that process. And so it's important, as with any medical treatment, that if you go and you get tested and you have a hearing loss that is clinically significant, it's affecting your communication, that you get it dealt with as soon as possible. And of course, there's financing and other ways to make it more affordable.
We do thank you for joining us here at Health Essentials. We're talking with Perry Ebel of Beltone. He is the president and CEO. There's a group, Perry, in Nashville called the Beacon Center that has prompted the General Assembly to begin this year a review of the professions that are state-owned, and that would be in the case of audiology, that would be one. What if and the goal of that organization, which is favoring the free market, is to end state control of to end state cartels, if you will, that allow certain fields to prosper apart from competition. So, what if the audiology field were freed to go? Would that be better? Would that be better for the listener to have more choices, more price options, and for people like you at Beltone to have more competition?
Well, if you free cancer doctors from licensing and oversight, would that be better for patients? If their cancer doctors didn't have any oversight, weren't regulated, didn't have their credentials checked, it's a question of...
Well, probably there would be better results because cancer doctors have a 2% success rate.
Yeah. Question of balance. We want to balance. There's heavy competition in the hearing aid market, very heavy competition. If you go to Florida, as an example, where I was vice president for the largest hearing aid dispenser in the country, which is Beltone, New England. And so we had a lot of hearing aid clinics in Florida. And you could stand on any corner in any Florida city, throw a rock, and hit 8 hearing aid locations. So there's heavy competition in the industry. It's not a question of competition. It's a question of credentialing. Here in Tennessee, we took the state to task last year about their licensing processes. We felt that it was egregious and unfair. And in
what was wrong with them?
I can't get into the specifics of it because I'm legally can't get into the specifics of it. What I can tell you is that Through working with the state, we were able to change the licensing processes in the state of Tennessee. And
in what way? It's a matter of public record. It's a matter of public record.
Okay,
what happened?
Well, what happened was the state of Tennessee had its licensing processes, which were developed in the state of Tennessee, which were inadequate to the task and unfair to those being tested. And in working with the state, we were able to get those standards nationalized such that the tests were fair, that they were competency tests.
Is that test for audiologists?
Test for hearing aid dispensers. And so we were able to get those tests and testing procedures and testing processors changed to meet national standards.
And those national standards, you're confident, make for a better audiologist and a better result for my listener and his aged mom.
So, what does a test do? A test tests for minimum competency in some given field. So we feel that the tests now do just that. They test for a minimum competency. Obviously, with any field, whether it's your field in radio or it's my field.
Well, my field's in the free market. There is no competency requirement, except the market.
Well, the market determines the competency. So it is with us. If you can have a bad doctor. It doesn't matter how he's credentialed or how she's credentialed. If she's not good at what she or he does, they're not going to get a lot of patients. And so it is in our market. You can be credentialed. You can have those minimum competencies. But if you aren't good at what you do, you probably won't last long in the market.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Perry Ebel of Beltone. Well, Perry, with the rise of the internet, and it seems like the regulatory function theoretically could be replaced by the internet itself, by people who rate each one of your Beltone clinicians, rate each one of your what you call clinics. Every clinic can get a rating, and people are satisfied or not satisfied. And in the end, you have an aggregate of feedback that's market feedback that will replace theoretically and will replace, I predict, state regulation of your field. Would that not be better?
Well, hey, listen, I'm all for not having regulation in my field. I wish we could do without it. But the fact is that if you look in the market, there are a lot of incompetent people out there doing incompetent things and unfairly taking advantage of people. So I think it's a way of making sure that the people that are in the field at least have those minimum competencies. Competition does regulate the internet. The reviews that people post on the internet certainly make up a part of what we're doing, and they're a very important part. So it holds everybody to task. Again, a balance between regulation and the free market.
So, but Beltone is an old name in hearing aids, right?
We're the oldest. Yep.
And so your business, your company has an inherent interest in regulation. Since you're bound by it, you're stuck under it, and with that regulation, you can kind of keep out people who are competitors. If you didn't have regulation, it would be an open market, and it would be a whole new ball game because you're the oldest and hopefully the best. Mm-hmm. And you would have to maintain your market share by saying we continually the best audiologists. That are tested by our own requirements, which are higher than the ones we were under the state's system, mm-hmm. and come to Beltone for service, right? You would have a real interest to be in an open market.
Again, I would never argue against free market. What I'm arguing against is that people's health is at stake, and that there needs to be some level of cooperation and competition. I mean, in the 1800s, the medical practice wasn't regulated at all. People were doing all kinds of crazy things to, quote, cure people. And the government was able to serve its purpose for the collective good and kind of stop that. The government's tendency is to over-regulate.
Well, we have vaccines today with immeasurable vaccine injury, and it's all permitted by the government, and there's no way for the vaccine producers to be held liable.
Yeah, in a perfect world, so I wouldn't have any
government regulation is not in the best interest of the listener. So, all right. So, in a nutshell, what's new at Beltone? What new things are coming out?
Well, we have a brand new product. It's called the Beltone Trust, which is the first hearing aid on the market. That allows for remote programming. So, one of the challenges, certainly with the population that we serve, the elderly population, is that hearing aids require routine maintenance and routine care, and hearing is never stable. It's always on the move. And we need to be able to react to that. And so at Beltone, we require patients to come in every quarter so that we can check their hearing aids. There's no cost associated with that. And then we do annual hearing tests to make sure that the hearing aid is always programmed to the hearing loss. Now, with these new hearing aids, not only is it a great hearing aid, the way it looks at sound is really wonderful, but we can do remote programming. So for those times where a patient needs a tweak here or there, all they have to do is get on their smartphone, tell us what the problem is. We can adjust the program at our office.
Is that through the smartphone?
Through the smartphone. The hearing aids are completely smartphone compatible. They're part of the Internet of Everything. And so they run Bluetooth. I don't need hearing aids, but when
my mom's hearing aid's not going to get hijacked by someone in Romania.
Everything's possible. Everything's possible. But I don't wear hearing aids, but I'll wear them when I go on trips because they're great Bluetooth devices. I can talk on my phone and just have the hearing aid and not hear anything. But we can remote program, send the program back to the hearing aid. The hearing aid will automatically adjust. And in fact, the hearing aids are so sophisticated, they geolocate. If you lose one, you can go on your smartphone, use it as a detection device, and find your hearing aid. So it's incredible.
Perry Ebel of Beltone, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
This is David Tulis. We've been chatting with Perry Ebel of Beltone. We are Health Essentials, brought to you by Loretta Lynn Lita. Loretta Lynn, find out more about her. David Tulis, Health Essentials. See you next month.